Good evening. It's a pleasure to welcome you this evening to the second in the Hannah Clapp lecture series, sponsored here in Carson City by the Nevada Women's History Project. Last time we heard from Sally Zanjani with some interesting slides and commentary on women prospectors. Tonight we have the pleasure of hearing from Willa Oldham, who's not going to talk so much, I think, about specific women in history as the process by which we gather and try to do something with that information that we gather. I've known Willa since the 60s in Boulder City, actually, I think is where we started. And we both had a mutual interest in state parks and some other things related to Southern Nevada. And then over the years, we've both arrived here in Northern Nevada and have reconnected. We have the distinct pleasure of having her papers, the background, some of her materials, the columns that she's written over the years, scrapbooks that she's compiled around various causes and chapters in her life, and they are in the special collections at the University Archives in Reno. And it was a real joy to be able to gather those papers from her. She also thought she was done doing this kind of thing, and so said, "You wouldn't like my research files too, would you?" And so you can imagine how my eyes lit up at that. And so I happen to have the Carson City research files that she had, topic by topic, and we have made extensive use of those to this day, and will continue and make sure that they find a home where they'll always be of value. I bring you now Willa Oldham, who will talk with you for a time and then hold your questions until she has completed her planned remarks, and then she has some handouts and will entertain questions from us. So let's give a hand to Willa Oldham.
I'd like to add one thing to what Jean had for us to say. Oh, two things, really, before we start. One of them is that if you know her, you know that when she asks you to something, she has a unique way of doing it. She asks in one of three ways. First, she tells you what is going on. Then she tells you why you should do it. And then she tells you what you're going to do when. And I feel like an authority on it because she's been doing this to me since 1968. And I would publicly like to say, Jean, you've given me the greatest time in the world because because of Jean Ford's talking me into doing this in Boulder City that I got started on all the Nevada history that is so exciting. This formality of me being up here is not fair, but I think it works better. If for some reason or other you cannot hear back there, then just do this and we'll do something about it. But what concerns me, and I'm delighted with, by the way, in the papers, if you take either the Gazette or the Appeal, you have been seeing articles like Carson City signs. And this is one of the great things in research, one of the difficulties in research. And so last year, before Jean got all these papers from me, bless her heart, we talked about some of this thing, and that's why we want to repeat some of it tonight. But this one is a better article, because this one's from scratch. She has all the papers I wrote about, and I don't know what I said. They're up there. So this is fresh. But in the time I want to talk about, really seriously you can't talk about all of them in the time we have, but I want to talk about some of the complexities, no matter where you are. And some of you I know are writing family histories. Some of you are here professionally writing in various ways, newspapers, magazines, articles, books, so forth. But regardless of which way you're doing it, it amounts to the fact that facts are facts. And if you're not careful, when you're working with something like history especially, in family or in the city or wherever it be, you're going to get into all kinds of fascinating challenges. I refuse to say they're problems. It really is a challenge because you think you have everything just right, and somebody comes along and has a better answer and can prove that yours isn't quite accurate. And so you start all over again. But it really isn't that complicated. It's just that we need to have a great feel for the truth in history. Because if we look at history, and I think Jean Ream in the Reno Gazette the other day said it, unless you understand the history of the area or the history of your family or whatever, you are not equipped to know how to do things in the present and where you should be going in the future. And I think that's one of the reasons we all study history. I know. So it really doesn't matter whether we're talking about family or we're talking about professionals. We're still going to be using the same basic things in terms of research. And incidentally, this is not unique to Carson City. Believe me, it's not. You can't believe, I could put that down there. You can't believe what you have happen in other towns unless you've been working there. So I want to start with something that I'm not telling anything new. People's memories are not what people think they are. And if you have 5 people in a family telling you either about a civic affair they're involved in, or they're telling you about a family affair, you have 5 different versions. 1 year later, if you ask the same question to the same 5 people, you now have probably 10 versions. Because we don't intend to do that, but that's the sort of thing we do, and that's why in writing you have to be so very, very careful. Because, and then you have maybe you don't have this in your family, but I'm not going to name, I called him Uncle Josh, I thought that was safer. Uncle Josh in our family is notorious for making it bigger and better every time he tells the same story. There is no way of knowing what the facts are because you don't have any documentation to go along with him. So we're dealing too with the people who like to embroidery, shall I say, and make us sound better than it really is. And we also have a situation, this is one that came out of when I was working on the hospital book. In interviewing people, one person said, and I was interviewing about 50 different people, involving the present at time it involved 2 people. Very, very prominent people here in town. One of the women took me aside and said, Willa, I want to warn you. If you talk to so-and-so, meaning the other woman, you are wasting your time. She is the biggest liar in Carson City. And I said, thank you. I didn't tell her I'd already talked to the other woman who had said, if you talk to so-and-so, she has never gotten a thing straight yet in her life. And so you get into a few interesting things like things like that. Then in Nevada we have some rather fun things that I want to share, but they're serious things. If you know the story of the competition between Mark Twain when he became a reporter in the Territorial Enterprise and Dan DeQuille, who was writing for the Gold Hill paper, they were good friends actually, but they wanted to see who could tell the biggest lie, and that's what they said, and get it printed in their own paper. And they worked very hard at this. So I don't use the Territorial Enterprise if it was during the time that Mark Twain and Dan DeQuille were trying to settle their competition, but because there's so many things you can't tell. They also documented, they did it really very well. But the one I like the best, Sam Davis, as you know, and by the way, Sylvia Stoddard of their family, has just written a book that you don't want to miss because of the Sam Davis family. Sam Davis was the editor of the Nevada Appeal, and he had a different approach to the situation when subscriptions were down. When the subscriptions were lower than he thought they should be, he would then write an editorial, a scathing one, about the inaccuracies and the grammar and anything else he could think about the editor and Wabuska. Now, I don't know how many of you been to Wabuska? All right, then, good, because you can appreciate, if the rest of you haven't, you really should go to Yarrington through Wabuska to appreciate this. But the point of it was, there was never a Wabuska editor, and there was never a Wabuska paper. But the minute he started in on this, and the Wabuska editor would then send him letters denouncing himself, and he would print those. So it built the circulation up real well. Again, one of the things that happens in communities that you're not sure of. And because we're a mining industry, and I can tell you this because I was involved with mining people, mining people, especially in the early days when there were fewer people here and they needed money, they also knew about the New York Stock Exchange. And so it was very easy to get money, because if you could write a big article about the new find in a certain mine, and they were extremely good at doing this in Candelaria and in certain other places, then they could get money from the stockholders on the exchange. So again, you have newspapers with great discoveries, etc., so forth and so on, and what the assays showed in the ore, and you have to be very sure that you get the assay records, because it probably didn't exist, but they got the money. And in one place, they never did have a mine, they just got the $7 million. They had a cap house on one side of the canyon, and they had a dynamite, because they have to be separated. The dynamite they kept on the other side, but nobody came out to see it, so they had no problem getting the money and spending it. All of which makes life interesting in terms of knowing what's what. Then you have another thing that's quite different. Many of the people who came here were people who were not well educated. Someone said to me once, if a person was doing well in their own community, they didn't come to the gold fields. And that's probably very true of many, many people. So we have, in the early days, we have early clerks and residences who did fascinating things. They spelled the best they knew how. And so therefore, again, you are looking at, but they're looking at facts this time. You're looking at things that they're really not sure of. And there are mishaps along the way. And so I should tell you that I've had a few, and I've caused a few, I'm afraid. I'd rather tell you about the ones that I've had rather than the ones I caused. But this one I think I caused. Governor Kincaid, according to what I wrote in my own book, it's printed in my own book, and in the manuscript said, was governor of Nevada from 1897 to 1882, and you can't do that. There's no way. It's a matter that two digits were transposed, and often you found a transposition in when you're going from one place to another. You also find that they just dropped it, they put in a date. And instead of saying circa, meaning, as you know, that it approximately is that date, they put it in and makes it sound final. So those are things that give you some challenges. And there's a new book, and in the new book that's out that I think is just terrific, because as the one that the Appeal has put out with the photography, because they're using so many pictures that haven't been used before. And 2 nights ago, a person called me and said, how does Alf Doughton, the famous reporter of Virginia City and Carson City, spell his name? And I told her, and he said, that isn't the way it is in the new book. And it isn't. I looked it up. But the fact that I knew who it was, I didn't read the caption. I just looked at the picture and enjoyed it and went on. So I missed it too, you see. But they do have it spelled incorrectly, and I think it's the only thing spelled incorrectly in their book. But that's a book that they really shouldn't miss. And some of those things are actually okay when you turn them in, but between the time it comes off of your computer and it comes out in print somehow, with all the people that are dealing with the paper, they get mixed up. And the worst thing that happened to me is that sometime back, I knew that one minister, I was doing a series on all the ministers here in town at their minister's request, and I knew that one minister's wife was very sensitive about how her name was spelled, and it was spelled in an unusual way, and her name was Marie. And she spelled it M-A-I-R-I-E-E. All right. And it was still Marie. So to be sure I was right, I phoned her. I didn't know her, but I phoned her, which you do, and said, how do you spell your name? And she was delighted that I cared. Well, do you know, if you know printing, you know they do compensated columns. And in this particular column, they needed 2 letters out. Guess what? Where they did it. And I just never did call her. I just didn't want, there was no way she was going to be happy. And but they're also gems. It's not all working out things. When you're dealing with some of these things, and when you're dealing with any of it in town, even if you're just sightseeing, keep your eyes open and keep your ears open, and you will hear some of the most fascinating stories. And Carson is full of them. Nevada is full of them. California, all of the western states, I think. And in fact, I think any state in the Union in its own way would have with this. And you get stories that fill in, make the people they're talking about far more human than if you had just talked about where they were educated, where they were born, what they did, what their achievement was. For example, Lolly is probably the most famous woman in the state of Nevada, or was at that time, she will not be now, internationally, because of the magnificent baskets that she made. And you learn all this, but you don't learn that one time she decided to order a corset, and she was very, very fat. And she had never had a corset before. And so the corset came, and she was so excited about it. It was one of these gorgeous things with all kinds, the strings, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. So she wanted everybody to enjoy it too, as she did. So she wore it, when she got dressed, she wore it on the outside of her dress, not on the inside of her dress. And another thing that they tell about that I love is that she also liked the bread that Mrs. Thurman Roberts baked. And she would go take her basketry, and she'd go sit on the 2 days Mrs. Roberts baked. She would sit under the kitchen window and work on her basket until Mrs. Roberts gave her a loaf of bread, and then she'd go home. Incidentally, some of you are not sure anymore where her place is. If you don't know, it's a little tiny spot. It's 331 Proctor Street, and it sits on the back of a lot. And the house that's on Musser Street from it is 312 West Musser, is where her benefactor, Abe Cohen, lived, who had the store and where he sold many things, and also he sponsored her at the Smithsonian Institute when she was there, and many other places. One other thing that if we think things through, if you want to talk about fur coats these days, and every time after I learned this, every time I see a fur coat ad, I think about it. The Washoe Indians had fur coats long before the rest of us did here. They caught their own, they tanned their own, and they made their own. And so it's a standing joke over the fact of whoever had the first fur coat. And it really is true, you see, that they had fur coats because they needed them, and that was a part of their livelihood. I know. And then the real gems I found, I went up to a cemetery on something one day, and I was talking to the caretaker there, and all kinds of fascinating things are available to you through that cemetery, or, as you probably know, any old cemetery. For example, and I checked with Les Groth on this. Les knows the story, I know the story, 4 or 5 other people know the story, but they felt it was better not to put it in the minutes of the Warren Engine Company, so there's no verification. But they had, years ago, a mascot dog over at Warren Engine Company, which was the famous engine company, and the dog was poisoned and died. And he was such a favorite that all of Engine Company Number 1 got together at midnight, and they very formally, in formation, marched up to Lone Mountain and had a burial ceremony with an oration, I understand, etc., and so forth, and buried their friend. And so up there somewhere is the mascot of Warren Engine 1, but they can't, nobody can document it, and it's too bad. You can document that that our cemetery is unique in that the only prostitute in the state of Nevada that's in a confines of a cemetery was Mary Ann Phillips, who is buried inside of our grave, because any other prostitute, including Julia Bollea, are buried far, far away. In Bodie, they put them outside. You can't miss because they put them just outside the railing, but it is not the thing to do. And so everybody's a little mystified that knows about this as to why they actually have Mary Ann Phillips inside of the fence or the boundaries of the Carson City thing. And talking again about Kincaid as governor, he was not only governor of Nevada, but he liked being a governor apparently so well that the next term after he was out here, he was the first governor of Alaska. And he is buried in the cemetery up here, and it shows the whole, all the information of him being in Nevada. And there are also 4 other governors of the state buried in this cemetery. And you could go on endlessly with that. One of the points we have to think about perhaps would be being sure when you write or talk about any place that you're talking about, that you know the era that you're talking about, because you may be confusing a lot of people if you don't by just what you do. One of the great things that was given to me, and I thought, why would anybody give you the 1902 Sears Roebuck catalog? It's wonderful if you're right. Absolutely. Because it's full, it goes everything from music to jewelry to, and incidentally, you didn't have men's cufflinks, John. You had cuff buttons, for example. You also, I didn't check on the men's clothes, but you also had women's clothes you had to be very careful of describing, because in 1902 the women wore, according to the catalog and what you could buy, corset covers instead of brassieres. They didn't have any brassieres. I looked real careful. They wore drawers instead of briefs. They had, this I thought was wonderful. I didn't know this. They had ribbed stockings and fleece-lined stockings, or hosiery, or hose they called them, in silk or wool or cotton. And they cost 25 cents a pair, by the way. But they didn't have pantyhose. And you wore skirts, you didn't wear slips. So you can give yourself away very readily if you're describing somebody by using the wrong terminology on it. Definitions of words change. In the 1923 Funk and Wagnall's dictionary, a farrier, as most of you know, if you have anything to do with horses at all, know is actually a more dignified, a more elegant term for a horseshoer. The way farrier came out was that a farrier could dispense equine medicine. They cannot now. So if you're talking about a farrier that was an earlier farrier, was he a man that was there giving medicines in lieu of a veterinarian maybe, or was he really a horseshoer? So it's fun if you can get a hold of an old unabridged dictionary to keep it in your files for entertainment. You also might like to know that you didn't go to Lake Tahoe through Clear Creek and up Spooner Summit. You went up Kings Canyon. And you can have great fun with the stories that are told over why the Supreme Court was put in the middle of King Street so that people would have to go up Spooner grade rather than Kings Canyon. And they tell wonderful stories, those old timers, and some of them are still here to tell you, that they, after the snows were over, every weekend they had picnics after church. And they took all their shovels and rakes and everything, and bit by bit, all the families here in town got the road open to go up to Tahoe for the summer. Streets are fun, and I'm sure you saw the big picture that talked about Phillip Street recently. Well, I entertained myself Monday checking to be sure that I was telling you the truth when I stood up here. And I'd like to give you, maybe you haven't seen, how many of you came down Stewart Street today, one time or another? How many of you saw something unusual on Stewart Street? That's what I thought. I was hoping. These big, the signs that are up that say Stewart Street, the first three letters are off. You now have Wart Street. And you have Wart Street at Washington, and you have Wart Street at Highway 50. And this is what happens in history, people. I'm sure that somebody is going to take a picture of the post office while it's up there, not looking at that. And for posterity, you're going to know, and your great-grandchildren will know, that the federal building was on the corner of Washington and Wart Street. Or you're going to have somebody come in town and they're lost and they phone you. You've had this happen, haven't you? And they say, now where do I go now? And then you say, where are you? And they're going to say tomorrow, I'm at the corner of Wart and 50. And they're going to say you can't be because we don't have it, and they're going to get into a big discussion over, yes, because I'm looking at it, kind of thing. There are other little interesting bits. Now, William Street is William, not Williams with an S. But if you go to the corner of Minnesota, which is a 500 block, Minnesota and William, it's William Street, still is. So I drove all the way down, and over here by Smith's, would you believe, the sign by Smith's that goes onto Valley says William Street. They forgot to take that one down and change it. So we have things, but the one I like the best in town, really, is, do you know where any of you know south of town where Doubletree Street is? It's off of Shawn or off of in that area down there. It's a windy or you'd say the equivalent of 2 blocks if you're really giving them credit for much. One end of it, it says Doubletree, 2 words. The other end of it, it says Doubletree, 1 word. Now you tell me, which way do you go on it? And then you get into questions if you begin to look. As all of you probably know, 4 men bought Eagle Valley, which has become Carson City. There is a Proctor Street for Frank Proctor. There is a street for Abe Curry. There is a street for J.J. Musser. What happened to a street for Mr. Green? No street. And I can't find where there is a street. So you can do that in your research if you want to really get into something that is, why didn't he have a street? Ormsby is even more confusing because Ormsby originally had the distinction of going from 5th Street through the red light district, which extended from 5th up to King Street. But it also went on to the end of town, and it was Ormsby. Don't ask me why they changed it, but they did and made it Curry Street. I have a feeling, and I can't prove it, that if you know where Curry's home is, they wanted it down there because he had this roadway that went to that he had made at the expense of the city to go from his home down to the river. And so it was probably nicer and gave him a better feel if he could go on Curry Street than he did on Ormsby Street. I don't know. And I have to tell you one thing that I like that comes up. The Wrinkle Mansion, you know, is now the Carlton House. And the Wrinkle Mansion Mrs. Wrinkle had beautiful, beautiful things. If you went to the auction, it was a crime when they sold everything there because they had exquisite things from the Philadelphia fair. From much of it came from Paris and from other countries. And then after she had her beautiful home, she also bought things, and she at a given point bought a beautiful Georgette table lamp, beautiful red Georgette shade. And she only left it up for a week because since her house is at the end of the red light district, there was a lot of confusion going on. And so I don't know what happened to that's another one you can look up. I don't know what happened to Mrs. Wrinkle's beautiful red Georgette lamp, but it was a beauty. And that one is documented by one member of her family. There's also what, as long as we have the brothel to talk about, one of the famous stories that is documented is a very, very prominent person. Now, you can figure out who it may be or think about it. I'm not going to get into it. Who frequented the brothels, apparently not necessarily the same one, but you could always tell that part of the entertainment in a small town was someone would say, guess who is down on Ormsby Street, and then they would tell you where he was, simply because his faithful dog always went with him and waited on the stoop until he came out. All right, so stories become stories. Fleischman used to be Henry Street, and I'm curious. I know there's no, that I had, and I never remember to ask Guy Rocha, because you have John Street, William Street, and Henry Street. I would assume that it's from the Bath family, because they were the early settlers who came here, both John and Henry Bath, and I think there was a William Bath. I'm not sure, but you'd have to check and see. On it. And so you can go on indefinitely, but if you see something that is an error, please contact the powers that be and tell them, because it doesn't help the people who are in town, it doesn't help the people who are trying to write, it doesn't help anybody when the street is one thing in one spot and one is another. And part of this occurred because our streets are named in some part because of the many small state highways that we have that may be only 4 or 5 blocks long, but they still are state highways, but they have a street name. So those signs are made by the state, I understand. The other signs are made by the city, and never the twain shall meet, I think, in some of these cases like this. Then you have all kinds of wonderful things happening in homes and buildings. In most Western cities, I'm sure it was especially true here, buildings didn't stay put either, as the way they were originally started. Or they had added things. For example, the Bliss Mansion, across from the mansion, never did have those 2 one-story buildings that are behind it. And actually, as a matter of fact, I will tell you this, when we first came here, they were talking about putting this apartment in the back of the Bliss Mansion, and I was asked to write a protest about degrading the history of Carson City, which I was glad to do. And that's how I got into this in Carson City, Gene. You didn't have to even push me on that one. But there are no 2 sons, and that doesn't show the picture. Actually, it was just the house. There could have well been, in many places, a barn, because they were on Curry Street, and all. Many people had cows, chickens, whatever. And you can tell yet, if you look at some of the garages, you see one of them's over by the hospital, I know, and one of them's over on Roof Street that I'd always look at. They had to have a Model T. No other car could have possibly gone in those doors and out again. There is just no way. And when we first started coming up here in probably 1968 or so, they still were occupied. They still were, and they would have, and the parking lots, we loved it because it would say park your car for the day, 50 cents. Do you remember that, some of you? And you knew the legislature was in session because they were all around there trying to find parking for them. Some of you, I think most of you know, that there were lots of lots available to the mansion. The major reason that the mansion is on the street that it's on Mountain, has nothing to do with the fact that it's a little elevated and in a nice location. It has to do with the fact that supposedly, and I never met him, I hope you say he was before my time, but some of you may doubt, the banker, who was also a subdivider, was very stingy with his own money. And so when he went to San Francisco, Mrs. Rickey, who was always upset at her husband's lack of generosity, offered the lot that they have the mansion on to the state for $10, and they took the offer. So they have it. Which is almost as good a deal as the Methodist Church was, because, well, not I don't know, it might have been, it was better, I guess, because the Methodist Church was secured for a pair of boots. And boots cost more, right? And houses moved. Houses moved all over mining areas. It was a common thing. If you know Fred and Jerry Richards, their grandparents bought a house in New Empire, which is, as you know, the far end of town now, really. Moved it over onto Long Street. Then when the family's gone, they decided that was too much in town and they wanted to get out of town. At that time it was like a town of 5,000. And they moved it up into Kings Canyon, and if you knew Rilla Custer, the violinist, they bought the place, and so I understand it is still in Kings Canyon. So it was not uncommon. It was not uncommon for some people who liked their home to have it put on skids, you know, these big sticks and things, who liked their home and were going to a gold field, or it doesn't really matter where they were going, I mean literally gold field by name, or to other gold places. They just had their house moved down, and that way they didn't have to build or buy. They just put it on any lot that was empty and no questions asked. The Presbyterian Church, some people say, why was it built with this odd tower? It looks like it belonged on a castle or something. And the fact of it is that they had a tower, or cupola as they called that particular thing, but it blew down twice, and after it blew down twice, the vestry thought it wasn't worth it putting it back up again, so they left it the way it was, and now I hear echoes of the fact that it may be put back up again. So we'll see. The Catholic Church you can't find, and I don't know that there are any pictures of it really, the first one, because it also blew down completely. So they just built a new church on that. Then it was an also common practice for houses to be split in two, and one very well-known widow here was left with practically no money, and she was very proud, and she didn't, and the community didn't really know how hard up she was, and she didn't want it known. But she solved it very neatly. If you go to 206 Mountain, and then you go to 808 Musser, you're looking at a house. But what she did, she cut the house in half and turned the back end of it around and made a rental. And so she had enough money at that point for her to take care of her children and the needs that she had. So that, if you visualize, was originally one house. On the other hand, up Mountain Street at 500, where they had the shootist, where the Petersons lived, and where the Paul and Edmund Carrington lived for so many years. That's two houses. Their house wasn't big enough, so they had an opportunity to buy a house that people wanted to sell, and they attached it to the back of the house. So the question may often be, if what happened to a house that you know is a part of history, well, take a look at some of the houses. It may be either detached and you don't recognize the building, or it may be attached and you don't recognize Rise building. And I'd like to comment, which the rock house that's coming down, you know, now the house isn't so much, but the wall right across from the what is it, 216 to the 206, I said, down there on Mountain, was that house and the wall was built by the Episcopal priest, Father Hershey, and one of the Indians. And I'm sad to say, and I'm sure that those of you who are rock hunters are not proud of the fact that most of that fence came down because the turquoise and other valuable specimens that were a part of that fence is what they needed more in their places than they felt it was needed in the wall. And it seems like it's too bad that something hasn't been done of that. And then some of the Presbyterian manse is over on Spear Street, but it's a beauty parlor now, and it has been for years, because they wanted it out of there. It was the rooms, you know what the rooms used to be like, little tiny ones. It was too small. They wanted it as they have now with this manse. The Deluxe Motel, which is now down in Genoa, I don't know what they call it down there. Does anybody know? That's on off of the main street. The Deluxe Motel used to be where the Frontier Plaza is now, and they just moved it down and out of the way, and that took care of that, and everybody was happy. The people who bought it were happy. They didn't have to build a motel, and the people who didn't want it were happy because they got rid of it. And so that was the reasoning for that. And incidentally, I missed one on streets that I have to tell you. If you're talking to anybody who is over 60 years of age in this town, and they tell you about Main Street, don't look for it. They'll always talk about Main Street. I have never heard one of them call it Carson Street. But to them, it's Main Street. And so you know that if they say they were going downtown and they used to do this and that, down on Main Street was like this and Main Street was like that, well, you just substitute quietly Carson and go right ahead and you'll understand it. If you look at the hospital, or you look it up in the phone book, you would think it had moved, and some people have actually thought so. It has not. The front entrance used to be in the first hospital, and the first two-story unit that they did was on Mountain Street. And Mountain Street didn't exist until they had the first hospital. They had to build the roadway to get in to patients into where the hospital was. But now the hospital, the second unit, wing over there, is north of the others, and it is, so the hospital street address is Fleischman Way. I've never been able to figure that out. It's not on Husband Way. It's facing east, and Fleischman is north of it, but they know what they're doing. So, the most famous hotel in the west of the Mississippi was the St. Charles Hotel, and then it became, what do they call them, a flea bag? At one point, really, that's really what they call them. It was a transient for people that were down and out, and was called the Pony Express, and I never quite figured out how they had put that two together, but they did. Now again, it's the St. Charles Hotel. So you see, if you're reading all of this just blithely along, you better know what era you're talking about when you get a fact, or you won't have a factual story that fits where it belongs to. The Ormsby House isn't in the spot the Ormsby House was, and Monday I was totally frustrated because I had no one with me. I went around the block twice and I can't find the plaque that was on and it was about this big that said Ormsby House. It's between 2nd and 3rd or 2nd and 4th, I can't remember which. And they have done a new facade in some areas, and I'm wondering if the plaque is underneath something or has been taken off and not put back. So it's hard to say. The plaque that's over on the city administration building will tell you, if you look at it, that the Oddfellow Temple used to be there originally, and so that plaque with the Oddfellow links was left in when the building was built for the bank building. And some of the things have been saved. Many people don't know that across the street which used to be the BLM office, this kind of dates me, doesn't it? Is on the sidewalk is a plaque about like this that calls the LaQuare property the V&T Square. And most people don't even know that little piece is in the sidewalk, because it's not a sidewalk that any of us frequent too much. But more people don't know that that was Marie Wolfe's, if you know her, as one of the earliest, one of the people who's done a lot in the city. It was her, that's her family. And now it was her brother that was selling the house at the building at the last time, because she had sold to him. The most interesting thing, I think, to talk about, and this comes from a book that you may or may not be familiar with, and I think I did leave it home. If you're familiar with the book that Jack Curran wrote, from he's a resident of Virginia City, you're going to learn that Carson City people didn't have any firewood, because by now, with all the mines, the trees that came clear down to, what was it, about Ormsby, where Ormsby Boulevard is now, were all cut to make mining shafts. So there's no wood for winter, and they didn't have little items like DC bath running the oil tanks around and so forth and so on. And they solved it all, because at that particular time, as Carson began to build and heating in the winter was a problem, Virginia City was a bust. People were losing their jobs and had lost their jobs. They could not pay their taxes. And I don't know who didn't look up to see who the tax collector was, but he was ingenious, or she, whichever. Because if you needed firewood, you go up there and you would buy a one-story house for $25. But if you needed more and you had a larger family and a larger house, you bought a two-story house for $50, and it was up to you to saw it or cut it down in any way you could and bring it down the hill. So that explains why when you go up to Virginia City, you'll be going along and all these homes, and then suddenly there's a vacant lot. And I keep wondering, I wonder if that was a two-story house for $50, or was this a $25 job that used to sit here? But it was important to them. It was important to them. Some of the people sold those homes because that's all they had in order to be able to get away to go to some other place from Virginia City. And then you're going to find that as you do all of this, there are a lot of stories that haven't been told. And I think this is where maybe we can all contribute, whether you want to write it or not. Bill Dolan is wonderful at doing this to people. He does it to more people than just me. Pat, you probably had him do this. Bill comes in and he sees you and he says, oh, by the way, I think you ought to write about the ghosts out at the prison. Or you ought to write about the cemeteries that you no longer can find in Carson City. And this has a point, because at the end of Fifth Street on the Walsh Ranch is where Ormsby was originally buried after he was killed in the Pyramid Lake War. His family then moved him later to Oakland, where they lived, and then his granddaughter didn't like that. She had him exhumed and cremated and took him to New York. So somewhere in New York, Ormsby is in a cemetery, or else on a, as somebody said, on a mantle. We don't know, that kind of thing. There are wonderful stories to be told about how people lived in this town. And do you know there are very few? If you stop and think about it, we have all kinds of histories of Nevada. We have all kinds of this and that. We have very few stories about how people really lived. And that's what makes Jack Curran's book so good. One of the delightful parts he starts with has to do with the little boy, his family, when they had no jobs in Virginia City, came down here and got jobs with the state. And he was left up in Virginia City and then sent down about a year later, and when he was 7, on the train. And when you read his account of a little 7-year-old coming out into the big world for the first time, he was absolutely terrified over what happened, and he was so terrified when they got to Gold Hill that he was afraid that they were going to take him off and make him go back to this other place in Virginia City. But he was ready to tell him that he really wanted to go and see his mother and father and stay with them. And it just is beautiful in the telling. If you know Gloria Hargis over at the museum, she has some wonderful tales, and so do some of the other people that have never been told about living as orphans in the orphanage. And Gloria has a great sense of humor, and she was great, beautifully. We should tape her. They used to tape. They were given skates, and the Wilbur May, museum that's in Wilbur May, who came from Pasadena and had the big May stores and all, used to give all kinds of beautiful gifts once a year to the orphans. One year he gave them skates. Well, on Main Street, it was dirt. And that's a little hard to skate on. But youngsters are ingenious, as you know, and so they would wait till the doors were open, because they had no air conditioning in the summer in the Capitol, and they would get ready, and they would skate, and immediately somebody would come chasing after them, but they had it made, because all they wanted to do was to go from the south end to the north end, and then they'd go on out. And they wouldn't try it for a couple of hours until everything had settled down, you see, and they'd do it again. So it made a great skating rink for them. They used to go down to the courthouse, and there too, if you've ever looked in that parking lot, there are a couple of little windows that are kind of sunken in like they belonged in a dugout. And they would all squat down and sing songs to the prisoners that they invented about why they were in the prisons, and so forth and so on. And they'd make beautiful stories. The best one that I want to close with that is that if you knew John Brooks, whose father was also the sheriff at one point, there was one little boy in town, and he was the ward of his grandmother. Apparently his parents were gone, and he was an obstreperous little boy, and I guess grandmother get to the point she could, and she really paddled him on, from what I hear, very, very hard. And he'd run away. And he would run up into Kings Canyon. You men maybe know where it is. There are some mines up there and some caves up there, and he would hide in the caves for 3 or 4 days until he got word that his grandmother was worried about him. And then she'd get so worried that when he came home, she'd just be glad to see him. And don't worry about how he ate, because all the boys in town that were friends of his would wait till the afternoon V&T train went up, and they had to go lickety-split up Washington Street to make the curve to go up the hill into Lakeview. And on the, what they call a platform, on the end of the train, they would put all the food that they had caged from their mother's refrigerator, icebox, let's say icebox, correct, icebox, and they'd stack all this food on the edge of one edge of the train. And so as the train made the curve, and in case you know how jerky they were a good bit, all the food would come off, and the little boy would come down and pick up all the food and go back, and he'd be able to stay another day. And so there are many, many things, and there are many, but they're all stories that can only be good if we know when and where and how they happen. And there's still lots of ways to document. And I want to suggest we still have some wonderful older people here in this town who could tell us so much more if we would take the time to really concentrate on talking with them while they're still here. There are 2 books that I want to suggest to you. Somebody said to me the other day, I talked to them, but I wouldn't know what to say. You don't have to worry. Are you familiar with this book? D.J. Fulford, who is a columnist, is the daughter of the very famous Bob Greene, an international columnist. Not daughter, but I mean sister. And the 2 of them have done nothing but write questions. The book is wonderful. It's in topics, and it all has to do with knowing about what people were like and what you ask about them. So if you need questions, and I found that they're neat. Yeah, I wish I'd have had it when I was doing all the interviewing, because then I could just flip through, you know, to whoever you were and whatever occupation you had, and then read all of these, and then I'd have all the questions ready when I saw you. The other one, it says family, and more of us use this. We use 2 chapters. Chapter 6, which is, and I'll tell you in a minute, if I were smart, I'd remember it, as you, the author, as a private eye, and it tells you really how to go about doing research, and that's why I'm not going to tell you, because they do a better job than I do. And the second part is where to find what. And this is the thing that is always exciting, because there's so many, many resources. The other thing that we're finding exciting, and I would like to suggest, 2 things I want to do. I want to publicly tell you that, having worked in a good many places, we have 3 of the most wonderful people in terms of working very, very hard to correct, what I want to say, correct errors and myths and so forth and so on in the state. Guy Rocha and Jeff Kintop, who are over at the archives, and Bob Nyland, as we call him, Robert Nyland, who is the curator of history. And we are just so fortunate, because they're almost rabid on the way they really dig in to find out what the facts are, or won't tolerate something if it isn't so. And that's why you see so much of what they're doing now. And the other person I want to talk about has to do with all the things that Jean Ford has been doing. As she introduced you, she was talking about me. It's fair to talk about you. You talked about me first. And that is the fact that she was with the state park. That's how we met. All the kinds of things that are going on, I think Jean will go to. But the most exciting thing she's done over years, even then in Boulder City, she was doing it. We're a state that had very busy men, very few women working. And so many women in the state of Nevada, more than most states, I understand, have had positions that normally in other states would be done by a man. And nobody has documented them until Jean got into the act with the university. And so the exciting part now is what's going on in the Women's History Project. So if I would like to make a plea for that, if you know someone that you think should be recognized for one reason or another, let us know. And what we've done, and Isabel, you have them, don't you? There are 3 giveaways for you, because I figured that I wasn't going to be foolish enough to try to tell you history when Jim Hulse and a few of the others have written it so well. So I've made 3, so you're going to get a set of 3 giveaways. One of them has to do with writing. And there are 4 books in there for those of you that you don't need to read the rest of it. There are 4 books in that list that are purely for if you want to document things at home. The second one is a list that of books. There are so many, many books on Nevada, good and bad, mostly very good. But I have been asked many times what kind of books I work from, and so I put the list in, finally broke down and did this, of the books that I use the most, that you might want to have in your own library. But the one that's most exciting is, what color is the one about the women, Isabel? All right. Pat Quinn Davis was the one who very generously did the color scheme for us, so I didn't know until today what that. Gives the women that have been mentioned, and take a good look at that, and I made up a list my own, and see who is missing. And then there is an address that you can write to the Women's History Project and let them know and tell you what to do and what to say. It's been fun. I hope you see why there are lots of reasons we need to be very truthful when we're talking about the past. We can have fun just going on a picnic and searching something out, really. We really can if we want to with our family. And contributing that, you don't have to do a great big involved thing, but it helps so very, very much. And thank you. It's all yours, Isabel.
Just stay up here. Well,
Oh, you have to go up.
Preparing for tonight and bringing us some of your...
Did you see what it is?
Let's move over here. Okay.
The Great Nevada Food Festival Cookbook, which I wanted. But most of all, Isabel and I had a discussion, and I had to tell her I didn't have a historical calendar. Isabel, where are you?
Right.
I do have it.
So we
Thank you much.
we wanted you to have those.
Thank you
This was, as you can tell, a wonderful reminiscing about the trials and tribulations of researching and writing. And I look around the room and I see researchers and writers who've had their own sets of anecdotes and issues that they could talk about. And is there anyone who would like to share? We've heard from her the trials of working with accuracy, trying to find real facts, trying to find such things as the street names, how the newspapers handle proper names, family stories. Anyone here have a question to Willa or a comment on your own experience as a writer or a researcher? No. Yes, Joan.
As a writer or researcher, but just the comment that when people come in to do research at the State Library and Archives, we've all had personal experiences that we can relate to them about being careful. And my family had two really interesting ones. My grandmother, when she tried to get a Social Security card, found that her birthday was 3 months off. And so she was really quite disturbed about that until she found out there were 7 children born on that day, but there hadn't been any born for 3 months before that. It turned out that the doctor went to the county seat every 3 months, and he entered everybody's birthday as whatever day. Then my mother decided she'd get a birth certificate at the same time, and she was born at home by the same doctor many years later, and she was a very sickly baby, and so he entered her as stillborn, and she had one heck of a time to get her Social Security number. So when you go and look at birth and death records, there's a lot of leeway there in that era too, in the 1800s and
I'm glad
early
she
1900s.
said this. I'd like to add one thing. And I'm glad you brought this up. There are 2 things, and that is that you need to know how long you're in the state that people have records. When the first hospital was started, they were so busy just trying to be a hospital that for about a week they forgot they had to do legal records. I found when I was doing the hospital book that 3 people swear in a stack of Bibles that their child was the first child born in Carson Tahoe Hospital. And when you get into a situation like that, I don't know what Pat does and some of the rest of them, but I was always advised in the training I had, you take the newspaper account because you therefore have a documentation that you are saying, I got this from so-and-so. And so you really don't know who was the first person. The other day when I was working with Craig Swope at the studio and we were talking, a woman called in and she really gave us an interesting one that I tossed to you and should have earlier, and that is that I was talking about you go to the first thing it's easy to do is to go to the census. Mm-hmm. Because that is a natural place. She said that's fine, but I lived in Carson City in 1980. I moved, and it was on the 1980 census. I moved to Florida for most of the next 8 years, and then I came back and was in the Carson City census for 1990. How do I prove that I was how do people know that I was in Florida? And so they're not absolutely fallible.
That's true. I really want to thank Willa for the work that's gone into these handouts that you have. I was not familiar that she was going to do this, and this is just wonderful. This is the first page of the last issue of our newsletter of the History Project, which introduced the fact that we do have a website, and we have about 34, 36 women whose names are on this page, whose biographies are there. That is just the tip of the iceberg and a very small beginning of what we would like to have as a resource for the people of this state. So Willa then has proceeded on the next pages to start giving you suggestions of women that we ought to add to the biography. I think that's what you've done here, isn't it? And each of you would have your own suggestions. We would welcome your communicating with us with those names. We would welcome you taking a look at the website, print down one or more and see the kind of format that we're using, and then develop an actual proposal for something that could be added to the website. This is something we're planning to maintain from here on out, make it available, it's available now to anyone who has access, but also in the spring we are going to be having an in-service training for teachers on how to use this website in the classroom. So the more we can add, the original list we have of 75 people that we felt like we wanted to start with had a balance geographically so that there'd be at least 2 people from every county in the state. But we have not completed all of those, but we are very anxious, particularly, to also get information on Hispanic women, Basque women, African American women, whose stories are even harder to find than some of the ones that we do have. So this is a good piece for you to look at and to look at how you might want to contribute. We do have files at the History Project that if people really would just like to help write the biographies, we have the information and you could take the files and work with us, and then we'll see that it gets onto the internet. The recommended reading is a real tool for all of us, and just all the comments that Willa has made and suggestions from her own experience. Anyone have a question or a comment to Willa? Anyone doing research about something related to Carson, and you'd like to know how would she approach getting the information? Let's put her on the spot here.
All right.
Anyone doing that? Got a topic that you're working on? Yes.
Well, I'm researching Dr. Cook.
You're what?
Dr. Eliza Cook.
Cook. And I really just started, and I don't quite know. I have all the information that's just readily available, but I'm not sure where to go to find more things that she did that must be documented. I mean,
It would be nice, wouldn't it?
It's obvious, there must be some things that are documented, but I just haven't found them. I haven't done a lot of research yet.
The thing I do the most is say, I say this to everybody. I say this to a 12-year-old. Do you know so-and-so on your street? And they say yes, and I say, who would I talk to on the street that knows about this street? Do you see? In other words, everybody may know something or may know somebody who knows something. So you learn to be a person who's constantly asking. But I would start with, and I didn't mention it either, because it's in here. We now have in Carson City, as some of you probably know and may have used it, a branch of the Salt Lake City genealogy group of the Mormon Church. And that is outstanding. We have a lady in town who discovered that she was an ancestor of Miles Standish and was eligible to become a member of the Colonial Dames. It took her probably 4 years working with because you work with church records. There are lots of records we don't think about. And that's why I'm suggesting that, and you're welcome to come up and take a look and see if this will help you. But I start primarily with asking people.
So the thing would be to go to the materials you do have.
Minutes, I didn't mention minutes, did I?
Right.
Minutes are wonderful, but watch it. I did the minutes I had all the excerpts. They were wonderful when I was doing the hospital book. I was scared to death because at one point I had all the minutes of the Carson City Hospital in my home. And I kept saying, please God, don't have a fire. Please God, don't have a fire. And it didn't. But the point of it was I got through 6 months and had developed 2 chapters and was very happy about what I was able to do. And then I got to the next minutes, and it said that in view of the discrepancies and the unfortunate experiences that they had had in the earlier boards, they had now revised all of the minutes. And then I found out, and again I kept asking why, and found out that one of the criteria for ending a hospital meeting in the early days was, because there were all men sitting there, when the bourbon either gave out or there was not any possibility of understanding each other because it hadn't given out, they went home. And so there were some amazing things that really sounded plausible if you didn't know the early days. But they did correct the minutes, I want to know, and I did too.
Excellent, excellent. Coming back to your question for a moment, after we adjourn, which is going to be very quickly here, be happy to talk with you about what you already have about Dr. Cook. But I would look at those things and see what clues they give you, just as well as saying, where could that lead you for further information? The fact that she served on the Mottsville Cemetery Board for a while might lead you in some directions. The Carson City Family History Center that she mentioned, which has the records back through Salt Lake, and her history starts in Salt Lake. So I think there are a variety of places that we could help steer you. Are you the person who's planning to portray her? Somebody's given me your name somewhere along the way, and so for what purpose are you doing this? What?
I took a Chautauqua workshop
Okay.
at the Humanities.
Oh, good.
And chose her as the person I wanted.
Wonderful, wonderful. For those of you who don't know, Dr. Eliza Cook thought she was the first woman doctor in Nevada, but we feel now she probably was not. But a wonderful woman doctor in Carson Valley for over 40 years, and we'd love to come to the day when you're going to share her with us. That'd be great. I think. Oh, question.
I was going to ask, where is the local genealogy record?
I didn't hear what?
Where are those local genealogy records to which you referred?
It's at the well.
I called them. I would call. What is it? What are they? It's not. What is it? Their office, their administrative building, or drop by over on
Solomon.
Okay,
Solomon.
it's at the church on Solomon Road.
The big one, and I worked with this lady who I was telling you about. Found out she was a relative. He was one of her ancestors. Neil Road has a fabulous one.
I have another.
Over in Reno. And so I would contact the Mormon Church just for one reason, to find out when they're open, or maybe somebody here knows. And they're very generous. You do not have to be in no way are they caring when you come in. I don't know what they do in Carson, but when you go into Neil Road for the big one up there, they ask you whether you belong to the LDS Church or not, and that has no bearing on proselyting or anything of that sort. They simply are interested in the statistic of which kinds of people are looking for that. And the same is true in Salt Lake if you go to Salt Lake. And they have excursions with certain groups going to Salt Lake just for that purpose to study.
They really don't have a lot of it right there in
But
hand.
they send it in.
It's on microfiche, or they can order it. But they are very helpful in being able to help you find what you need. There are some family histories here. For instance, at the church here in Carson, there happens to be an extensive history of the Plum family of Plum Lane in Reno. So you never know what you're going to find where. As part of the research that I've done, there's going to be a publication coming out in the next couple of months from the University Library on sources all over the state for unpublished material about Nevada women. And we'll be listing in that all of the family history centers in the state. So they're kind of an unseen asset that a lot of people don't know much about.
We also have, and I didn't mention, it's wonderful when you talk like this, then I remember what I should have told you. And that is oral histories. Oral histories do more to tell what a person was like, even if they didn't think they were telling what they were like. But the way they talk, the way they do things, give themselves away. And there is a book, there is a catalog from the university on the oral histories of the catalog. There are some wonderful oral histories over in part of the section of the Nevada section of the Carson City Library. And also we have the advantage, we're so blessed because we have all these libraries. We have the legislative library, we have the community libraries, and then that isn't good enough. We have all this networking that they do. So if they can't get it for you, if they don't have it, they probably can get it for you. They got a book from not so long ago for me that I wanted, that I was appalled when I saw it was coming out of one of the Connecticut libraries.
Good, good.
Okay.
We're going to have to wind this up because it is about the time we said we would close. There's plenty of opportunity for you to stay and visit with each other. Let me just say that we have here some of the library staff in this very building that could share with you a lot more if you come back during public hours. We have Sue Kendall, who's the chief of reference, Stand Up Sue, and an old-time Nevada historian and native of the Goldfield area, her family, and other parts of Nevada. And she's working with us in the History Project. She's just starting to put together the biography of Florence Humphrey Church for the website. And then we have Deanna LaBonge back here, who's also with the library staff, and Anita Watson, who's with the library staff. Right, and Joan Kirshner, who happens to be the head of Libraries, Museum, and Arts for the state, and we thank you all for the use of this building. Other resource people here that we need to recognize so that those of you who want to chat informally could do so. We have authors like Chuck Convis and Marianne, who does illustrating with him, and Pat Quinn Davis, who does her own writing, and Kathy Noneman, who's researching women attorneys throughout the state, and some people I see that have been students in my class here and there now. So thank you all for coming. Let's give a hand to Willa for stimulating us. Stick around and visit, and we'll look forward next